I'm really pleased today to introduce Dr. Patricia Kuhl as one of our guest speakers. I think it's particularly interesting, Pat told me right before we started, that in 1997 she spoke at the White House when Hillary Clinton was the First Lady. And in 1997, she did talk yet again about the importance of brain development in young children and how critical they are to every nation. Dr. Kuhl is the Bezo Family Foundation Endowed Chair for Early Childhood Learning, co-director of the University of Washington Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, director of the Science of Learning Center, and professor of Speech and Hearing Sciences. And believe it or not, I'm leaving a whole lot out of here because her bio is so thick that I just wouldn't be able to have the morning go as planned. She is internationally recognized for her research on early language and brain development, and her studies show that young children learn, and they learn very early. Dr. Kuhl is the 2015 recipient of the prestigious George A. Miller Prize in Cognitive Neuroscience, and her TED Talk has received just under 2 million views. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Kuhl, Dr. Patricia Kuhl, to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. That's my kindergarten Catholic school uniform. Brings back good memories. Good morning, New Hampshire. I hope you're ready to learn something about the baby brain and the baby's potential. What we've learned from neuroscience over the past 10 years is that the brain of a baby has to be built. All of the areas are there in the brain to an amazing degree, but the connections and the wiring and the functionality of the brain as it will become over the next couple of years is not there to begin with. And so the tools of modern neuroscience are demonstrating in a way that's absolutely shocking what's going on up there as a child is learning, as the child is listening or seeing or experiencing an emotion. So for the first time, a baby can be in an MEG machine, and I'll show you that later, and we get movies of what's going on as the baby is doing something. In addition to brain function, we're looking at brain structure. I'll show you pictures. We're seeing here about 150 color-coded areas in the baby brain. We can examine each and every one and see how those areas develop as a function of the child's experience. And the bushy connections, the wiring that allows those areas of the brain to talk to one another that are developed early in childhood. We're doing this to the point that the science is now producing interventions. We now know how to connect the dots between the crib behavior of a baby and early reading 5 years later. So the science is producing an amazing set of findings that we can guide our work to assist children to become all that they can become. So let's start with some simple facts. This is the data showing the size of the brain from birth to adulthood. Now, if you were in control of all of the resources, you were in control of Congress, good luck. But if you were, and you saw these data, when would you want to invest in children? You can see that by 5 years of age, the brain is 92% of its total size. By 1 year of age, 70% of its total size. This is the time when the architecture of the brain is getting formulated, and that architecture sets babies up for very, very complicated things later. The amazing thing from neuroscience is that it starts right in the beginning. Many of you have seen the idea that the connections between neurons, so all of your neurons, the trillions, 80 million neurons are there to begin with. But the synapses, the wiring between them is not there to begin with. You see on the left what it looks like at birth, and then at 3 years of age, and then at 14 years of age. And you see this change from a proliferation of synapses happening at the rate of 700 per second early in development. And then at the age of 3, with 3 times more synapses than you and I have, they're systematically pruned depending upon the experience of the child. That pruning is good. Parents who say to me, I don't want my baby's brain to prune. And you say, no, the pruning is good. The pruning is good. Pruning produces expertise. But that's the notion of the construction that's going on in that early period proliferation and then systematic pruning to strengthen the remaining connections to formulate a brain that is ready for the future. So you see this curve from birth, 3 years old, and then into puberty. Compare that to this one, which is a graph showing the critical period, the window of opportunity for second language learning. Now find your age at the bottom, and then find your skill level on the vertical axis, okay? All right, so the babies and children are geniuses up to the age of 7. They will absorb a second language. But as you move from age 7, every 2 years, there's a systematic decline in the automaticity of your learning. Babies are like sponges with regard to how they acquire language, and we've learned a lot about it. You and I might learn a second language after that puberty period, but we won't do it to the same degree, to the same level of expertise. You won't, it won't become automatic for you. So, but this is a big lesson in this graph, demonstrating that you don't learn things at the same rate over your age. There are special times in development. There's a window of opportunity when the brain is ready for environmental information. And it's that time when, if you provide that information to the child, to the growing, developing brain, that magic happens. So we've been studying this magic. It's very important to understand what's happening. Why are the babies so much better than we are? Why can you take your child to France and they're absorbing information at the age of 2 and 3, and you're standing alongside them, but you're not absorbing to the same degree at all? What's happening in their brains? What's the magic that they're putting to work, and how can we capitalize on it? We started studying maybe 20 years ago using behavioral measures, and I'll show you the brain results in a minute. But behaviorally, we'd been doing tests all over the world. I had 8 laboratories all over the world testing infants on the sounds of different languages. In order to learn words, they have to know which sounds are being used in this culture to distinguish words. So we tested babies by having them sit on their parents' lap, and we trained them to turn their heads to the left to the loudspeaker when the sound changed. So let's watch a baby in that task.
Can a baby as young as 6 months old hear the difference between 2 vowels? This baby is trained to look for the toy when the sound changes. She's being distracted, so she'll turn only when she hears the difference in sounds. The key question, will she turn before the toy lights up?
E, 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 E.
Okay, she's a genius and she knows it, right? Okay, so this same baby, tested at 12 months of age, can no longer perform in this way for any sound that doesn't belong to the language she's been listening to. So at 6 months of age, the babies are citizens of the world. All the sounds of all languages, they will behave in exactly this same way. The parents, of course, are not citizens of the world. They're culture-bound listeners. And parents will not be able to do this task for any sounds that are not in languages they were exposed to in the first 7 years. So you've got this child born ready for any language. And then during that period between 6 and 12 months, and we've actually narrowed it to 8 to 10 months, something very special is going on in the baby brain. And what's going on are 2 very distinct things. The first thing the infant's doing is listening to us intently and using that computer-like brain to calculate the statistics of incoming language. They take statistics as they listen to us talk. And what are we doing? We're speaking motherese and parentese. How many of you have heard motherese or the phrase parentese? Right. Okay, so I'm talking to you in my adult voice, but if I had a 2-monther in front of me, I would be saying, hello, how are you? Can you open those big blue eyes? Okay, not your job interview voice, but a very, very entertaining signal for infants. They will select to listen to it whenever you get the opportunity. So that signal is ideal for babies to take statistics, and they are indeed. Studies all over the country are showing that babies' brains act like a computer to listen to us and pay attention to the high-frequency items. So they are statistical machines in a sense. But there's a second feature that's extremely important, demonstrated in experiments where we exposed 9-month-old babies, monolingual Seattle babies, who had never heard a second language, to Mandarin or Spanish. And we gave them 12 sessions over a month's time and asked, what did we do to the brain when we exposed the babies to that brand new language? And the answer was, if they heard the language live from native speakers in my lab from those foreign countries, they learned so well they were equal to the babies in Taiwan in the case of Mandarin. They were equal to the babies in Spain in the case of Spanish. 12 sessions over a month's time at the perfect time in development, and the babies absorbed the information, but only in the presence of a human being. In the live condition, they learned perfectly. In the TV condition, beautiful DVDs that the kids stared at and touched the screen and you thought they were learning, nothing happened. Brain tests and behavioral tests following the 12 sessions in that video exposed and an audio exposed group, no learning whatsoever, whereas the babies in the live setting, magic. Magic was happening. So there's something about the social context, and you're going to hear about that from a number of speakers. That social human being in front of our children is absolutely critical. There are very special things going on in the brain when we're face to face, not only with our babies, but with each other. Brains are meant to learn from other human beings. So this presents itself something interesting and a problem, a social justice problem. So if babies need to hear language, and they need to be face to face, and they need to absorb it in the way that I'm describing, it's magic to the brain, what happens if they don't get that? What happens if they grow up in a family in which there's not a lot of talk, not a lot of engagement? Well, you've heard about the 30 million word gap, and we show on this slide the differences by age 4 in the number of words that professional families and working class families and welfare families present to their infants. So this is just focused on the raw number. What we've been seeing in the laboratory is something more akin to the quality of engagement that parents provide for their infants. On the left is the parentees speech graph. On the right is the standard speech graph. We're plotting the words produced at 24 months for children whose parentees percent, the prevalence of parentees in their homes by adults on the left. The higher the prevalence of parentees at 11 months, look at word growth. That curve is like this. Straight up. The more parentees, the more engagement face to face that children experience, the words produced zoom up, regardless of socioeconomic status. And on the right, you see that standard speech, what I'm using, is flat or slightly negative. There's no significant effect. Parents need to know this. This is a key to that developmental growth of language. And if you do studies at the age of 5, if you wait till children are 5, and you take measures of an area of the brain, Broca's area, you can see it lit up here on the right, the relationship between, we had taken IQ measures, social engagement measures, cognitive and linguistic measures on the children. None of those features predicted Broca's area's activation as much as the socioeconomic status of the family. So how do you interpret that fact? Well, socioeconomic status of the family is a proxy for opportunities to learn. Children, before the age of 5, need opportunities to learn. If they're not there, the brain can't do its work. It can't wire those circuits. The architecture doesn't form to the same degree, and you get these kinds of results. Well, now we can go even further. We have a $2.5 million machine, magnetoencephalography, the only one of its kind in the world that allows you to put a person of any age in a totally safe, non-invasive, totally silent machine and see movies of what's going on as that brain is working. We were the first in the world to put a 6-month-old baby in an MEG machine. And you can see she's totally comfortable. She's got insert earphones. She's listening to the words and sounds of many different languages. We're tracking her little head with a kind of GPS device, so no matter what she's doing, and she can move around and play with toys, we know exactly where her brain is, every structure in the brain. Of course, we're interested in specific structures in the brain. So what's going on up there? What do we see? Well, have a look. Here's a 12-monther, and we're going to show you the activity in the brain in response to a word. So here's a 12-monther. I've highlighted 150 areas. We can actually see 1,000, but here's 150 areas. Focused on the auditory, 2 auditory areas, because this is sound, and 2 areas related to social engagement and language and literacy, Broca's, and the big connection that allows these 2 areas to talk to each other. The red bubbles are activity of firing in the brain. What you see is one expected result and one surprise. On the right, the auditory area is firing like crazy as the baby's listening. But look at Broca's area. Broca's area fires also at exactly the same time. Why? Because that baby's trying to talk back. That baby's rehearsing. What do I have to do to join this conversation? These are 7 and 11-month-old babies tested in this experiment. At 7 months, the baby's brain is responding. Every time you talk to that baby, that brain wants to get in the conversation. Why do we talk to children before they can talk back? To give them practice at doing it, to give them the desire to affect the world by speaking their own words. We've now shown, not only in these movies of function, the beautiful connectivity that's growing in the brain, measured with diffusion tensor imaging, DTI. This is a 12-monthers connectivity. Look at that brain. Talk about a wiring diagram, right? This is what is allowing these infants to do such sophisticated stuff. And we can connect these connections. I can tell you, we can identify specific ones important for certain abilities. Here's executive function, the relationship at the age of 5 between executive function, which allows you to direct your attention, inhibit your responses, to sort of pay attention when you're supposed to. There's an area, that red pathway that you see there on the left, is correlated very strongly to the behavioral measures in the questionnaire at the age of 5. So the more executive function these children show at 5, that brain area is stronger. We have another example in which we can show another pathway in the brain, the arcuate I showed you connecting auditory to Broca's, the arcuate fasciculus. Jason Yateman in our laboratory is demonstrating that this pathway, when measured prior to reading, can predict when a child is ready to read. That child is ready to read when the pathway is not totally formed, not started, but just beginning to formulate. When the brain is formulating its pathway and language instruction hits that circuitry, magic happens. Not all children are ready to read at the same time. These kinds of measures will give us a kind of personalized neuroscience. We talk about personalized medicine. We will be talking about the personalized neuroscience of learning as we move forward in the next 10 years. I want to mention how important bilingual learning is for the child's brain. We in this country are afraid of bilingualism. We've been afraid for a long time. But the rest of the world is highly bilingual. And I want to show you, our data are showing that the bilingual babies exposed to both languages are perfectly fine. They're learning words and sounds and doing everything right on schedule. What things that people don't know is how cognitively flexible those babies are. So cognitive flexibility means when someone gives you a new problem, you're really good at inventing the solution. Doesn't mean that you're smarter, but it means that you're inventive. You're a problem solver. So we've been studying children growing up in families. Actually, this work was done in Texas with a group of Head Start families. We were interested in the kids and their brain development because they were bathed in bilingual experience, but also the moms, because this is a 19-year-old Head Start mom, teenager, lovely woman. This is her 4th child. And we were interested in how much we could teach her about her baby's brain and her engagement in that process. And the answer to this experiment was wonderful data on the children, but the mothers were changing as much as the baby's brains as we told them the power of their involvement in their children's learning. Well, let me show you the studies that we've done. This is a test of executive function for an 11-monther, right? We have a plexiglass box. We hide a toy. The baby gets used to, there's only one door open on this box. Baby gets used to getting the toy. Then we change the rules, reverse the box, and see if they can invent the solution. Let's watch this monolingual baby try to solve the problem. There's the toy in the box. All right, so they all push the box, like maybe it'll pop out if I push it. Okay, so she works pretty hard and she gets that toy, and that's very exciting to these little kids. But now let's change the rules, turn the box around, and put it in the other side. So now the door is open on the other side, and she, like we all do, used the solution that used to work, all right? But what she needs to do is find a way to get to the other side, and she doesn't do it. She doesn't solve it. Watch this bilingual baby do the same task. Toy goes in, She pushes, but she finds it. Yeah, she wants that toy. She actually doesn't want to give it up, but we get it back, put it in the other side. All right, so she's also going to look to the old side briefly and then work really hard to get it out of the box on the other side. Okay, the statistical result is that bilingual children, babies, and even adults are much, much better at cognitive flexibility. It's good for your brain, too. Less Alzheimer's in bilingual people and slower cognitive aging. Bilingualism is good for our children. All right, so I'm going to finish with the idea that the science has progressed to interventions, and I will only describe one. We're working on producing bilingual babies in Madrid, where all of the children are enrolled in nursery schools from the age of 4 months. We're also working on the design of an early language and literacy intervention for low-income families. As I said, we can now connect the dots. We know what parents need to do to bring about that phenomenon of excellent language and literacy in the children. And the last one is a music intervention, a study that we finished, and I want to show you a bit about that one. It's interesting because it's not only a fun experiment, it taught us something profound about the brain. Okay, we were exposing babies in 12 sessions in the experimental group, and there's a control group. They listened to songs that are the waltz, the bump, 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 bump of a waltz. And it's in a social environment with other babies, 12 sessions over a month's time, again at 9 months at that very, very sensitive period for auditory stuff, brain tests after exposure, and we watch development till 30 months of age. Here's what the exposure sessions look like.
Me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd.
Okay, so what did 12 sessions of listening to waltz music and acting do to the baby brain? Well, the expected was sharper responses in the experimental as opposed to the control group in the auditory cortex. You present that rhythm and a violation of that rhythm, and the brain goes, oh, I know that wasn't right, the active brain. But not only that, prefrontal cortex, where babies are training their brains to attend, lit up in these children. We trained these children, we think, in pattern perception. They got to expect an auditory pattern. When it was violated, their prefrontal cortex, the executive function part of the brain, was very, very active. We thought, well, if this is a general phenomenon, it ought to work for something other than music. Sure enough, when we tested them with speech, a speech rhythm, uncommon, doesn't exist in English, it's Japanese. These babies were significantly better, not only in auditory cortex, but in prefrontal cortex. So what's the message here? The message here is that brains are ready for experience. They're ready for experience in social environments that they can act on. Their brains get wired based on these experiences, not only in sensory cortex, but in prefrontal cortex that they need to direct their attention to the things that are interesting in the world. What we have to mention is that if a world is unpredictable, if there's toxic stress in the home, not only is brain development not going as it should, they learn that there are no predictable patterns in their world. Pattern perception doesn't develop. Expectancies are that there's chaos in my world. We need to provide information for a world to design non-chaotic environments for our infants, babies, and children, to prepare them to be everything that they can be. Thank you so much for your attention.